Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. We had a great time in Austin, Texas at the OSCON conference. Interviewed a lot of people, great show. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack and doing the wrap-up for OSCON 2017 here with Kelsey Hightower, one of the chairs of the show. This is your second OSCON.
Yes, I'm a co-chair.
Co-chair.
Rachel and Scott Henselman.
Rachel and Scott Henselman, right? So how would you assess this show? What's your wrap-up? What are your thoughts? Like, what are people talking about? I mean, it's not all Kubernetes. It's not all containers. What are the kind of the underlying themes that you're hearing about? What did you learn?
I think one of the big themes is that since open source is so common, over the last few years, we were like, hey, enterprises are starting to do it now. But now, yesterday or 2 days ago, we saw the White House talking about open sourcing stuff. And I think a lot of people was like, okay, everyone's doing it at this point. If the government can do it and ship open source software, then I can do it. So we saw a lot of that, community, culture, of course. TensorFlow, machine learning, that's pretty big. So I think a lot of people are actually starting to use this stuff. So a lot of the new stuff, containers, ML, TensorFlow, people are putting it into use and they're sharing their stories.
What are some of the stories that you came out and were like, wow, that is something that...
Honestly, I like when things don't work.
Yeah, it's fun when
Maybe it was like, hey, I went all in on X and it didn't work out. So we went back. And I was like, it's okay.
It's all right.
To try something out and go backwards. People did that a little bit. I won't name any names, but I think that's healthy in any project, that it doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah.
And when it fails, that's what I like to hear. Like, what can we do to make it better, whether it's my project or another project? So that's now, people have those scars, and that's good. I
think those are good. That's kind of where you really learn stuff too. It's like what didn't work and why didn't it work, and how do you kind of move on from that, right? So with that in mind, what do you see the direction of, OSCON, going forward? So are you going to try to have more of those kinds of stories, more of those kinds of presentations?
I think OSCON going forward is, we always think of OSCON, or at least I do, it's like the GitHub of conferences. Right, there's something for everyone. There's a huge menu. You can go from ML to someone building things out of spare parts and making them work. So OSCON has a mix of things. So I think going forward, we want to make sure that we're highlighting all those successful open source projects. We definitely got to keep OSCON weird. People come for that, right? People want to know who's building their own things, what it looks like, who's challenging the odds, the legal part of software, right? The ethic part of software. So I think going forward, we'll have some of that. But also, we want to include a lot more people in the process. So we'll be reaching out to these communities a lot earlier and asking them, what do you want to see at OSCON? What do you want to bring to the table? And we're also moving back to Portland. Yeah. Right? So we're going back home.
That's great. Back to our hometown. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, it'll be walking distance. No airplane will be required.
That's right.
So it's always kind of nice to be in your backyard. But I think for a lot of people, OSCON is Portland. It belongs in Portland. So I think a lot of people will be looking forward to that.
Right. It's when I was first getting into writing about technology and for Read Write Web and and later at TechCrunch, OSCON for me was like the show of the year. It was it. It was like, and it was, I think partly because it kind of it did represent so much of a new time, that we were seeing then. That was a lot of things were really new, like these technologies that people were developing were still very crafty almost, right? And now they're not as crafty anymore. There's a lot more standardization in those technologies, and it's that. And I'm curious on how do you recapture kind of that kind of energy and passion, which sometimes you just have to move beyond because the world has matured quite a bit.
Well, and also it's a new era in open source. A lot of these open source projects are being run by startups, and they have their own conferences, right? So typically you would have these conferences or these projects would be too small to fund a 2,000, 3,000 person conference.
Right.
But now it's actually part of a startup's marketing budget
Right.
to throw an event for an open source project. So I guess that kind of adds to the choices people have. Do I go to OSCON or do I go to a particular technology conference? So for us, we're always thinking about how do we add something unique. So we want to talk about containers. What do we talk about when it comes to containers? And I think that's kind of what's on the choice now. So man, open source has come a long way. It's not just, software in a repository. It's usually like a community, a marketing campaign, ecosystem, people building on top of it. It's a whole new world for that stuff. And I think OSCON's going to have to figure out how do we extract the things that people loved originally about open source in general.
So I had a conversation yesterday, and this group was asking me. They asked, who are leading these open source communities, and what are the business drivers for why they're starting these open source projects? And that was a really interesting question for me, because that to me reflects how open source is changing, right? Because now we see open source organizations as less about free software, where like the whole free thing was such a conversation. Now it really is a business.
Yeah, I think open source software,
story.
at least, my early experience with it was the free alternative. It was the thing that you wouldn't get locked into. It was the thing that was more affordable. It was the thing that you could modify, so free is in freedom. And I think now when you think about open source software, for some people it's their trial edition, right? It's a new product, it's a new offering, and it's the free trial. We're gonna spread this via open source, and once we find a market fit for this, then we'll come with the enterprise version, right? And I think for some people, open source is the business strategy. It's the free trial. It's cheap. You can get a lot of people to help contribute to it. You can build the community, and that's really hard to do with proprietary software, right? If it costs something at this point, of course you're going to cut down on its accessibility, and the more people that can try it, the easier it is, I think, to build a market for something.
How does so one of the things that is apparent, out of this kind of discussion is that, open source culture is not just for the developers anymore, right? It's for the C-suite. It's for those mid-level managers, right? It's much more encompassing, which then poses, I guess, I don't know if it's a paradox, but it does pose some interesting questions about an open source conference.
My guess is this: depending on what you want from open source or free software, that's kind of an independent question. If you're a person producing something and you just want the world to have access, Scott Henselman talks about, the device that, helps him with his diabetes.
Right.
He wants that software to be free so people know what's affecting their bodies. So he's looking for software as a freedom thing. We can't all be locked out of it or be charged astronomical rates. We got to have some control of our own lives. If you're a business looking to get a product out there as fast as possible, you may be looking at open source as a distribution mechanism. Get popular on GitHub, maybe some buzz on the outlets, Hacker News, and now you have your first set of trial users that can help you kind of build the product. And if you're an enterprise, maybe you want to see a world work better way. Maybe you are a financial institution and you want to open source your credit card processing libraries. Maybe you're doing it for recruitment purposes. Or you just want to give back because you built your business on top of other open source software. I really think it comes down to the individual's goal with open source software.
That reflects the multifaceted world that we're in, right? As everything does become more programmable, and we will need more ways to understand whether it's something that just is needed to be free for everyone, just because it has to be free for everyone. Otherwise, the systems break inherently.
Well, this is part of freedom. Some people are free to capitalize. Some people are free to make a freemium product. Some people are free to switch gears and go straight commercial with it. All that's a fair game, and I think really people are asking themselves, OSCON, people really want to have a place where they can focus on more of the freedom part of it. Freedom to share, freedom to reuse, licensing terms, like there's more details that go into this, and the community part. I think a lot of things are outside of how do I ship and distribute software, how do I sell it, my community, and are we growing the number of people who use it and benefit from it?
Right. Interesting times. So there's a civic aspect to it, and O'Reilly's always had like a civic aspect to its whole approach to how to what content it develops through through the community itself. I'm just kind of wondering, what is that passionate edge that we'll see over the next year emerge, right? What is that? Is it, because these kinds of conversations, I think, are just starting, where we're starting to understand open source software, as, much more semantic. The semantic definitions of open source are not inherently known, right? Because I think, there's been that phase where people have gotten past open source software. How do you make any money off of open source software? I mean, that argument, that conversation seems to be kind of like whatever, it's just in everything. You figure it out,
Well, I think people for open source will be whatever you want it to be. You have the freedom to build the things that you want to build. As the ecosystem steps up, this stuff will be reusable. People will be able to create their own industries, whether it's free, freedom, or for a cost. I think people will just control that. So right now, I think people are pretty comfortable with startups maybe doing, a lot of the newer projects. The price is right in the beginning. The utility is good enough. We're okay. If that were to change, then I think you'll see people change. You'll see a response in behavior. If we think that the people producing open source software become bad actors, or there's a bad spirit behind it, I think you'll start to see people say, no, let's just do this in smaller groups, or force things to be pushed to a foundation. We see that a lot, right? When things get to a tipping point and too many people rely on certain things, it becomes critical mass. Then we do have foundations that step in and try to neutralize or centralize the IP, the logos, the rights, to make sure from a legal standpoint, it stays free for all people involved.
So just wondering about the conversations you have with people here. What are some of the conversations you had with people? What were the attendees saying?
Well, for me, mainly, a lot of people, this is their first time to OSCON. And they've never experienced this level of community interaction, right? A lot of people aren't here to sell you anything. If you look at our sponsor, Exhibit Hall, it's not about selling. It's almost more about, we are authentically involved in open source. Here, let us prove it to you. Here's the products that we have. Here's the stickers of all the open source we've done. Here are people that work on open source. So it's a different vibe here. And I think when people see that and are presented with that, it kind of fosters this more of a community thing. So we turn, what you thought was just a big corporation, they look like they're just a part of the community. And that's where some people took to the floor, right? So the hallway track, people walking around, it's like, wow, all these people are working on stuff. I met this person, I met that person. So for me, I engage in those, right? I go to a lot of technical events where it's just purely technical, not as much of the community aspect. And in this case, I think people found a way to engage in the community. Of course, everyone's working on something or using something, but it's that community thing that I personally was engaged with, the last couple of days at OSCON.
Well, good. Well, any last thoughts about OSCON before we go? Anything that you'd like to just share about the show overall and what you're thinking about?
Yeah, honestly, I think OSCON is a special conference, and you wouldn't know it unless you attended OSCON.
Right.
And I think for most people, we are very opening to new speakers, different kinds of speakers we saw from our keynotes. And I think people should understand that it's not just about software. Community plays a big part of this, legal, how people grow and mature. And I think open source is always going to be the way we do software going forward. It's one of those constructs in technology that I don't think we're ever going to backtrack from. Yeah. And I think this is the place where you can get to learn how to be a contributor and what life is like once you become one.
Great. Well, Kelsey, thanks for putting on a great show. Really enjoyed it. Glad to be here, and we'll be back in Portland next year.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Bakers at thenewstack.io/podcasts. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.